unprecedented gathering of young people, I cannot help thinking that 100 years from now, the historians will be calling this not the beat generation, but the generation of integration.
Self-evident that all men are created equal. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will, and He's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
So let me kind of explain to all of us what we're doing. We're trying to create a video. It won't be a Zoom video. We're trying to create a video that's supposed to last anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes. It depends on how many people we get to support with us. And we're not looking for really long testimonials, but we're looking for candid testimonials. And we want you to be yourself and not worry about all of your perfect diction and all of this. And we're not asking you to organize it in any specific order. It's like a candid conversation that we're going to replay several times. We're going to replay it for the first time at 2:00 in the afternoon on MLK Day, January 18th. But we want you guys to be candid and just about what happened to you and what you know and how you have been impacted. So these were the questions. Who do you think Dr. King is? What do you know most about him? How has his life impacted your life? And how are you planning to celebrate Dr. King's Day on the 18th of January? And so what we're going to do is to allow each one of you to speak at your leisure. We're looking for like 2 to 3 minutes. We're not looking for an oration. We're not looking for a speech. We simply want your candid answers about who is Dr. King to you? Who is Dr. King to you? And that's really what it really boils down to.
Good day, everyone. I would like to welcome you to this great event of a celebration of a man who has worked hard to help to bring America to a place of peace, a place of unity, a place of welcome to so many people, a place of tolerance. However, I've mentioned all these qualities that make a country great, but we still have a long way to go. Every generation that comes need to carry on from where the other generation ended. And the question is, why do we have to keep repeating things? It's important to be very historical, because any nation that does not know or have a clear vision and knowledge of what has happened in the past usually get lost in the whole process. We need to let our children, especially the African American kids, our young people, our old people, to know where we have come from. It's very important to know that people have walked before us and have given their lives and their time, their energy to make us to be comfortable this far. One of these people we celebrate today is Martin Luther King Jr., who gave this great I Have a Dream talk in 1963, August 28. As a matter of fact, he was not going to call it I Have a Dream. It was rather infused in the middle of the talk. The whole idea was to address at the Lincoln Memorial building, address the matters of freedom and inclusion. And that was how this talk, he was among 10 other people who talked. And among them were some Protestant pastors. There was a rabbi. Unfortunately, you'll be surprised to know that there were no women in that congregation and in that march. The white labor leaders were there. In this address, King made allusion to Gettysburg address about emancipation, proclamation of independence. He also impressed Kennedy. He impressed the Kennedy regime, and that helped to draw the talk on, advance the talk on civil rights. And the legislation at that point grabbed the essence of this talk and helped to move America in the talk of freedom and liberty. The FBI also got involved, and a new attitude came in the talk of racial divides and the treatment that were given to African Americans at that time. I'm not going to say a lot about the situation at that time, but I want to share with you some of the core values of Martin Luther King Jr. talk. As a priest, what resonated most to me, I love the poetry and the flow of literature. I love the sermon, but what touched me most was how he could transport values of the Bible to preach on an area that is most political and economical. There were 4 biblical aspects of his talk that impressed me. The first one was from Amos chapter 5, verse 24. But let justice roll on like river, righteousness like a never falling stream. Justice roll like a river, righteousness like a never-falling stream. Look at the poetic expressions there and the movement of justice and the movement of righteousness. This married together could take us to a great height, and they could also make a place great and oily functioning as a great machine. In Isaiah 40, chapter 40, verse 5 to 4, this it brings in the idea of every valley shall be exalted, every mountain and hill shall be made low, and crooked shall be made straight, and rough places plain. This is one of the greatest message of the Old Testament. And in this message, it seems like a sound of a dream, but it's a challenge. I found the answer of that challenge in Isaiah chapter 61, verse 1, that says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor," etc., etc. So when we look at this dream and say, how could this be achieved? This is this is what Jesus Christ has come to do, to make sure that there is this great equality, that this acceptance, this tolerance. If we look at that answer, that question and that dream, it becomes our dream that all of us will be part of the fulfillment of this dream. And then the Galatians chapter 3, verse 28, there is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor there male or female, for you are all one in Christ. Galatians chapter 3, verse 28. This is taken back from the Bible. We are all created in the image of God. We receive forgiveness from God. We are equal in the eyes of God. So why do we as Christians not see this? Do we need such a great talk before Christians will see that we are all equal in the face of God? We are still facing these challenges today. This is where it becomes a big challenge to all of us, Christians and non-Christians alike. The final one is the final pericope that touched me in his talk is about Psalm 30, verse 5. Weeping may stay for the night, but rejoicing comes in the morning. It means that it's not going to be easy. It was not easy then, and to maintain this dream, which has come to a reality, it's not going to be easy. But he says we are assured that our faith comes handy, and our faith makes it possible for us to take the difficulties and the toils of segregation and racism and destroy it. But to destroy it, definitely there must be pain and crying. I look at what we needed to look at, what we needed to consider in this journey, in the weeping. We look at privileges. People are now going to share their privileges. So it's a both way challenge, both to the slave masters and slaves. And I'm using these words in a very metaphoric manner. So the freedom where everybody will share equally what we have been given by God. I don't know whether you have ever found it easy to share the privileges that you have, especially when it makes everybody to be included. And then maybe you might get a little bit of the portion of this privilege. And then because more people are sharing from it. And then for the lowly to come up and say, I need to be part of this. So it will take some sense of struggle. It's not going to be easy. But then that comes with the sacrifice of Christianity. The sacrifice of Christianity makes it a demand for all of us to lose things so that people around us may gain something, or gain things so that people may become equal. And I want to ask you a question. Where do you find yourself in this dream, which is a dream that has been realized and is yet to be realized? Where do you find yourself in this dream? Martin Luther King showed us that someone could be historical, someone could have a vision, and that vision, wherever he is now, he's smiling because his vision has not been crushed. What do we have for our generation? Our political position in this particular day seem to have taken us back from this dream. and from this vision. But we must continue to fight until we bring the reign of God here on earth. You see, it is our mandate. It becomes our mandate. It was a dream. Someone is sharing the mandate of Christ. Again, my dear ones, as we celebrate Martin Luther King Jr., let us keep this vision alive. Let us keep it floating. Let us keep it our vision and actions. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Deacon, for inviting me to make some points about Dr. King. For me, I always say a child of the 60s. And I remember very well that in 1966, Dr. King came to my high school when I was a senior. And I was so excited. All that we had read about him, it was still the time when everything in Kingstree, South Carolina was segregated. We couldn't go to restaurants. We had to go to a segregated school, my school, Tomlinson, and jobs were very limited as to what African Americans can do. And I was so excited to hear this wonderful leader and that he had chosen to come to my little town, my small town of Kingstree, to share with the people. He came there, it was on Mother's Day back in 1966. And the purpose was to encourage people to go out and vote. It was voting because it was at that time that people were just, again, understanding that we had the right to vote. And he wanted to make sure that the people would vote. And I can remember from that day forth, my mom and dad would never let an election go by that they couldn't vote, because my dad used to talk about having to pay poll tax. And that was one way they kept Black people from voting, if you didn't have that money to pay the poll tax. So Dr. King was just not a leader to me, but in many ways a mentor. I was so proud of him that he was a preacher, he was a reverend, he was courageous, he was inspiring to me, and he was a wonderful speaker. And I just love that. And I wanted to get on the train back then, as we would call it, get on the freedom train. And I wanted to be one of those people to make a difference in our world and to have Black people feel good about who they were. And so everything I think about Dr. King is related to that moment. How will I celebrate on this weekend? Today is his birthday. So January 15th. So it's wonderful we are doing this on his birthday. And I always remember in school, Elizabeth probably remembers, I would make this a big day, the day of his birth, even though we would celebrate on the Monday, the holiday. But we would have a big celebration in the school on the day of his birth. But Monday, I have several things I'm going to participate in. On Sunday, I am the speaker for the Diocese of Buffalo Martin Luther King celebration. We have a mass with a newly installed bishop here today, and I will be the speaker for that event. I'm going to be talking on one of Dr. King's less familiar speech. Is called How Long, Not Long, when he spoke to the students at Alabama State. I could just go on and on. And I was thinking about where we are now at this moment with the violence, with the pandemic, with Black people feeling more economically deprived than ever. Poverty is still in our communities, health issues, not having equal access. So I always remember Dr. King would say, no justice, no peace. And I had the privilege of living in Montgomery, Alabama, and
Wow.
going to Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. You cannot imagine how thrilled I was to stand in the pulpit where he preached and go to his house there in Montgomery and to see on the porch the bullet remains of when they shot into his house, and see Rosa Parks, and just all the things connected with what our wonderful leader, who was for people having unity and having equal opportunities. And I guess I'm still so much, no guess, I'm still committed to working for peace and justice. And as he said, when one of us is not free, then none of us are free. We have to walk together and not get weary. We have to dream the dream that he had and not give up or grow tired. And we have to keep on keeping on.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. Let me go back to our view. Okay. Thank you so much, Sister Roberta. That was excellent. Elizabeth, you keep zapping out your machine, but thank you so much as well. I know
He
you
was
guys.
excellent. And to me, the proud, like Dr. King, the young people, an inspiring Dr. King here before us.
Absolutely. And she's going to combine that with a great skill of athletics as well. You'll be proud to see her, Sister Roberta, one day when you come back this way. We hope you come in one of her seasons where she's playing volleyball or softball or all the other things that she does so well. And as well as make straight A's. She makes straight A's at her school as well.
That's always, yes, that's it. Smart, smart, smart. And keep that up, because Dr. King was a component for education and for the best.
Hey, little bro, you ready for the Dr. Martin Luther King celebration?
No way, Bert. I'm going to play basketball with my boys.
Frankie.
Bert, I know who he is anyway. He is the dream speech guy, yeah.
He is more than that. He was a big part in the civil rights movement.
Really? I just thought it was all about his speech.
No, little bro. It all started for Dr. King, where he was born Michael King Jr. on January 15th, 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia.
But I thought his name was Martin.
It is. Many people don't know that he was born with the name Michael after his father and later changed his name to Martin.
That is cool. What else do you know, Bert?
He is known in history for being a minister and social activist who helped lead the civil rights movement here in the United States. He even received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964.
Okay, but how did he fight for equal rights?
Frankie, even though slavery had ended in history by this time, there were laws in place that did not treat African Americans fairly and used something called segregation, keeping whites separate from African Americans. During this time, there was a young woman who had been thrown in jail for not sitting in the back of the bus, and after her story came out, a woman named Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks was also arrested for not sitting in the back of the bus. This is where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and others helped spread the word about African Americans being treated badly in Montgomery. After fighting for fair treatment, Montgomery stopped forcing African Americans to sit in the back of the bus.
But why is he such a big part of Black history?
Frankie, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. kept going as a leader during the civil rights movement.
So what about his I Have a Dream speech?
On August 28, 1963, the historic March on Washington happened with over 200,000 people in Washington, D.C. There, Dr. King made his famous I Have a Dream speech, where he let the world know about his belief that someday all people could be brothers and sisters no matter the color of their skin.
That is pretty cool, big sis.
I know, and even though he was assassinated on April 4th, 1968 in Memphis, Tennessee, his life and what he stood for is still remembered in celebrations around the country today.
Wow, Bert, I can play basketball anytime. Let's go and celebrate the life of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. for all the adults and for all the kids.
Okay, I'm going to start with our first student. I'm going to have them come and boys and girls, when I call your name, just come sit down. Look straight at Mr. Harrison. Okay? Yes, sir. Come on, sir. Take your mask off. Can you see him, Mr. Harrison?
Yep, very good shot.
Okay. All right. So, Mr. Harrison, I'm going to have them introduce themselves, give their grade and their teaching, and we're going to go to work.
Okay.
All right, Curtis, go ahead.
My name is Curtis Isaac, and I'm in the 4th grade. My teacher name is Mr. Miller.
Curtis, who is Dr. King to you?
Dr. King to me is a leader and a civil rights activist.
What do you know most about Dr. King?
Well, I know most about Dr. King that he led marches, and he was born in Atlanta, Georgia.
Is there anything else you would like to say about Dr. King?
Yes. He also had a dream, and the dream was called I Have a Dream.
How has his life impacted your life?
His life has impacted my life is because if it wasn't for him and others, segregation would still be going on for parks, buses, stores, and public schools.
How will you celebrate MLK Day?
How I will celebrate MLK Day January 18, 2021 is I will have some family come over and talk about what he has done for us.
And maybe I had the camera down. Okay. And, okay, there we go. Okay, Megan, you can take your mask off. Just gather yourself here, you'll be back. Okay. All right, Megan, name?
My name is Megan Amici, and I'm in 3rd grade, and my teacher is Mr. Miller.
Megan, who is Dr. King to you?
Dr. King to me is
Move that thing out of your face. That braid. Yeah. Thank you.
Dr. King to me is a civil rights activist and a leader.
What do you know most about Dr. King?
What I know most about Dr. King that he was born on January 15th, 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia.
Is there anything else you know about Dr. King?
And he died on April 4th, 1989 in Memphis, Tennessee.
How has his life impacted your life?
His life has impacted my life because without him, segregation would still be going on.
How will you celebrate MLK Day?
How I would celebrate MLK Day is I will go out and have fun.
Thank you, Megan. Okay, go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is Shindindu Ezike, and my teacher is Mr. Miller, and my grade is 3rd grade.
I want you to look at the monitor. Tim, who is Dr. King to you?
Dr. King to me is a leader and a peacemaker.
What do you know about Dr. King?
He was a Baptist minister, and he was a coach.
How has his life impacted your life?
He will let me go to any black or white school I choose.
How will you celebrate MLK Day?
My family will come around the dining table and pray, and then we will go out.
Okay, thank you, Chin. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is Aiden Swagger. I'm in the third grade, and my teacher is Mr. Miller.
Aiden, who is Dr. King to you?
Dr. King to me is the first president of the SCLC,
And what is the SCLC?
the Southern Christian Leadership Conference.
What do you know most about Dr. King?
What I know most about Dr. King is that he led marches.
Is there anything else you know about Dr. King?
Yes, I know that Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 5th, 1929.
Is there anything else you would like to share about what you know about Dr. King?
Yes, and that he gave his famous speech on the Lincoln Memorial.
What was the name of that speech?
I have a dream.
How has his life impacted your life?
Yet his life has impacted my life by helping in ending segregation.
Okay. How will you celebrate MLK Day?
I'll celebrate MLK Day by going to MLK Park.
Thank you, Aiden. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
My name is Anthony Fannin, and I'm in the third grade, and my teacher is Mr. Miller.
Anthony, who is Dr. King to you?
Dr. King to me is a leader and a man of is a hero and a man of great courage and wise.
What do you know most about Dr. King?
I know most about Dr. King is that he was a civil rights activist and he was a coach.
Anything else you would like to share about what you know about Dr. King?
Yes, he was a leader of the civil rights movement.
How has his life impacted your life?
His life impacted my life because if it wasn't for him and other people, we would still be a segregation for stores, restaurants, and other places.
How will you celebrate MLK Day?
We will go out and have a party for his birthday.
Okay, thank you, Anthony.
To come back.
Okay, sit back and relax. All right, you ready? Okay, go ahead and introduce yourself again, Brielle.
My name is Brielle Armani Smith, and I'm in third grade, and my teacher is Mr. Miller.
Brielle, who is Dr. King to you?
Dr. King to me is a social activist and Baptist minister.
What do you know about Dr. King?
What I know about Dr. King is that he fought equally for African American civil rights, and he won the Nobel Peace Prize, and he was born on January 15th, 1929.
Is there anything else you know about Dr. King? Okay. How has his life impacted your life?
His life impacted my life is because he helped end segregation and he helped end segregation of public schools, parks, buses, and stores.
How will you celebrate MLK Day?
I will celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. Day is by going to places and having fun.
Okay, thank you, Brielle.
Who was Dr. King to me? He is a very courageous person. He is also the person who stepped up to be a leader. That's what Dr. King means to me.
Okay. The second question was, how has he impacted your life?
He impacted my life because if he didn't do anything, I probably wouldn't go to the same school with other kids. I would probably not go to the same restaurants. I would probably not go anywhere where white people would have gone, and probably not pay for this house a lot. Sorry, it disconnected.
Okay, so go ahead and you can say that again. We said, what do you remember about his life? So go ahead and start that over.
Well, I remember he had four children, and he has a granddaughter too. He marched through Washington, D.C. and speak "I Have a Dream" speech.
Okay, and how do you plan to celebrate his day on Monday?
I plan to celebrate by sharing my memories with him and being thankful for what I have right now.
Okay. Who is Dr. King to me? Dr. King was the reluctant, successful leader of the civil rights movement of the 1960s. But more personally, Dr. King is the reason I believe I can dream big. As I progress towards the end of my high school career, I look forward to applying and eventually getting accepted into college. From college, I will be able to gain a degree to help the less fortunate children in our foster care system. Due to all the work done and inspired by Dr. King, I can work towards my dream. Just as Dr. King preached at the March of Washington, in honor of Dr. King, on MLK Day, myself, as well as my family, intend to serve the less fortunate population of Columbia, South Carolina. Thank you, Dr. King.
To me, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was a strong advocate for equal rights for all. Even though at first he did not want to join the civil rights movement, he joined and eventually led the fight against injustice. He inspired me and many other children to fight for our rights. When he was strong and was one of the greatest warriors for equal rights. Without him and other fighters like Rosa Parks and John Lewis, I myself would not be able to attend Cardinal Newman School or encourage people to vote, which proved to be instrumental in the 2020 presidential election. During this year's MLK Day, my family and I will serve the homeless populations which continue to face injustice, especially in the realm of voting. Dr. King, thank you so much for your work, and I will continue to work towards a more equal and equitable world.
To me, Dr. King was the mediator, the voice of reason for the civil rights movement. I was in high school when I became acquainted with the movement and the efforts of the Southern Leadership Conference, which then was known as SCLC. Dr. King and his message of persistent demand for equal rights, calling repeatedly upon our elected officials and other leaders to see the injustices that were being done to our race. He often spoke against those who were placating that violence was our only recourse for the solution. And when I talk about others, I'm talking about Minister Louis Farrakhan and Malcolm X and Stokely Carmichael, and others that I cannot name at this time. I believe that it was his insistent plea for nonviolence that gave many the will to proceed, the will to march, the will to stand. It is the impetus that got us through the 60s and the 70s. Dr. King to me was a hero, a champion for the fight for equal rights, and he spoke of it in his letters from Birmingham and his I Have a Dream monologue. I truly admire and respect all that Dr. King did and aspired to do for equal rights for our people. I read all about the people that Dr. King admired: Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, abolitionist, and many biblical quotes that he made. I think he related to these people and these words of wisdom to keep and to give him fuel for the journey that he was on. So I learned so much more about his spiritual depths when I read the book that his wife Coretta wrote, My Life with Martin. His life impacted me as a wife, as a mother, and as a career woman. I thought of his rights and the fight that he had made, and I would often have spirited conversations with my spouse and with those to where I was employed. I thought often of his struggles and his unwavering fight to do the right thing. However, as a mother, I wanted my children to know of his fight and to remember what he was fighting for. I purchased Black History board games so that I could make them learn Black history and have fun doing it. I gave my children special projects to complete about Dr. King and other Black leaders. I made it a part of their allowance each week, especially during the summer, so that they would not take it as frivolous and insignificant. On Dr. King's birthday, no matter where we were, we would walk to the bus route and ride in the public transportation on the back of the bus. My children hated this. They thought it was demeaning. I did it from the time they were in elementary school until they went to high school. They would often say as we walked to the bus line, "But Mom, we've got 2 cars. Why are we doing this?" And we would walk to the back of the bus and sit there. And I would remind them that we were doing it so we would know how Miss Rosa Parks felt when she was asked to relinquish her seat and move to the back of the bus after a long day's work. I would also recommend to my children the reading of the Willie Lynch letter of the making of a slave if they thought I was being overbearing. It is my belief as a parent that we are somewhat responsible for what lives and grows in the minds of our children. And I want them never to forget the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, and I want them to pass it on forever, lest we forget the journey that we have traveled and we forget what we're asking for when we ask for equal rights. I encourage you, if you haven't, to please visit Dr. King's Memorial in Atlanta. You'll be inspired.
I graduated from Benedict in 1963, May of 1963. And my older sister, Veronica, graduated a year ahead of me and landed a job in New York. And I wanted to follow my big sister. And I was fortunate enough to get accepted into the Teacher Corps program, which is considered the Domestic Peace Corps type program. And so I was able to go to grad school and also work in an elementary school to get that education. And I did community work as well. And we had orientation in July. And then in August, we had a break. And so one of my grad school classmates said, why don't we just go to Washington for the March on Washington? So I went to that not knowing what to expect and what it was like. So that was my first civil rights activity or introduction to the civil rights movement. And it was a sea of people. I didn't get to see Dr. King, nor anywhere close to the podium to see any of the dignitaries. But just being in the crowd was so exhilarating and exciting. And everybody was so friendly and nice, and that you just felt safe. So that was my introduction to the civil rights movement and activity, and just learning more about it. So that was my introduction to knowing about Dr. King, and when I was teaching also in New York, the Muslim mosque was right across the street from the school, and we used to go over there for lunch because they were reasonable, healthy lunch for $2. So we would do that every day for lunch, and then got to know, some of them were very, civil rights advocates as well. So, and then we had the Black Panthers, not too far. I don't know where their office was, but they were not too far, and they would escort different children to school to make sure that they get to school safely. Because this was all in Harlem, by the way. So if you know anything about Harlem, it was safe, but it was rough because the people were, but people, there was very high drug problems in New York at that time. So the Black Panthers used to escort the kids sometimes in and out of the tenements that they had to go step over drug addicts and so forth. But anyway, I learned a lot, and I went to more activities to learn more about civil rights and how important it was to be involved in the things that we could do to help our community. And let me see, what else?
Well, one of the questions was, how has he impacted your life?
Well, my life was impacted that I was always very conscious of the African American community. It inspired me to take a trip to Africa. So I went to Africa on a chartered flight with a group of activists, so to speak. And also had an afro.
Wow, okay.
So I call myself a young revolutionary. But it was very, very exciting and a good time in my early 20s, Mm-hmm. So it was a different life thing. And then when I got older and I was able to travel other places, I went to the Lorraine Hotel, mm-hmm. where it was shot, and toured that facility in Memphis. Mm-hmm. So he impacted me a lot in that, and I started reading his his writings and his speeches, and he was just a very powerful person and very intelligent. And we are suffering still a great loss, and many of the things that he preached and talked about then are still very, very much relevant today.
Correct.
So go ahead.
I was going to say, what is your plan to celebrate his day on Monday?
With COVID, I'm probably will stay home, but sometimes I do go out to some of the events, like at the King Park, not far from me, and or help out at a community center or go to breakfast. There is a USC used to have a breakfast celebration, but I don't know if I'll do any of that. I think pretty much I'll stay in and maybe just read some of his teachings.
Right. Would you say that Dr. King has a message for our church in these times?
Message? I'm pretty sure, yeah. I mean, he's given us so many things to think about and a map to follow, pretty much. So, yeah, there is a lot out there that we can from and utilize.
And so when you were in DC at the Lincoln Memorial, was there ever another time where he and you crossed paths?
Well, you know, I think I was in New York when he was assassinated and the riots and everything. I was living in New York at that time. And so as I, you know, got older and moved around within the U.S. a little bit more, I went to Atlanta to the King Memorial Center there and toured that. So that was, you know, things like that would be my connection.
Correct.
Back to hotel where he was shot and then going to the museum there in Atlanta.
Correct. Okay.
In thinking about this holiday coming up, Martin Luther King's holiday, it brings to mind, you know, what I thought of, what I knew of Dr. King, because at the time he was doing most of his work. I was in elementary and secondary school, and I was aware of what was going on. I never met him personally, but the two things that specifically stand out to me, which are of significance with regards to Dr. King. I've done several speeches on the holiday itself with regards to King, and one of them, I talked about his letter from a Birmingham jail, about the incident where he was arrested in April 1963 in Birmingham, Alabama. At that time, they were undergoing the usual persecution that was happening with Blacks. And Birmingham was considered one of the most dangerous cities in the country for Blacks because of the bombings and other things that had gone on. And so he'd come there to bring attention to this by leading some marches and protests. And the judge at that time issued a statement saying that they prohibited any demonstrating, parading, boycotting, trespassing, or picketing. So they did just that, and he was arrested on April 12th, along with Ralph Abernathy and Fred Shuttlesworth and some other members of the SCLC. They came up with the money for them to seek bail, but he wanted to stay in jail to draw national attention to the situation. And as a consequence, he wrote this letter from the Birmingham jail, starting out on scraps of paper that he was given. And it never was mailed to the people that instigated this, the 8 Christian leaders who wrote an op-ed in the paper stating that he should not be carrying out these tactics. And so he, in a very philosophical and logical sense, explained the spiritual, religious, legal, ethical reasons for why it was necessary to do that. And in the course of that, I think his famous quote, injustice anywhere is a lack of justice anywhere, or something to that equivalent. And so that brings up the second thing that stands out with Martin Luther King to me. I started medical school at the Medical University in Charleston, South Carolina in 1971. When I got there, I made it an effort to understand what had gone on just before that in 1969, when there was what's called the Charleston hospital strike. There was a nurse who had been demoted from a nurse to a nursing assistant because she complained about the way African Americans were treated in the hospital. There were racial slurs, they were not paid as much, the conditions were not good. And so she had contacted some other members of the nursing staff, and they wanted to meet with President McCord, William McCord, to discuss that. And they'd also contacted a national union. And so when McCord did finally agree to meet with them, he had more of his anti-union people meeting than there were people at the meeting. So they went on to take over his office to do a sit-in there, and they were fired because they said they left their patients abandoned. Well, they didn't leave their patients abandoned. Nurses wouldn't do that. They had made arrangements for their patients to be covered, and it was their lunch hour that they went there to do that. So consequently, the national attention was drawn to this, and Coretta Scott King, Martin Luther King's widow, because he had died the year before, he was assassinated the year before, came down with other national figures, and they started a strike which started in March of 1969 and lasted until it was finally resolved in June. And the resolution of it was that because of the national prominence that this has brought, was that they were given concessions, though they were not allowed to form a union because South Carolina is a non-union state. But the significance of those two things, the letter from the Birmingham jail and the Charleston hospital strike, brings to mind to me what the efforts were that Martin Luther King was trying to achieve. He was trying to accomplish something by using peaceful protest. And we hear all kinds of things now about, Colin Kaepernick knelt because he wanted to bring attention to something, and he was chastised for that. King was put in jail because he was leading peaceful protests. Change only occurs when there's enough attention, there's enough heat brought about to make people aware, and more than just the local people that are there to make them aware of that. And the bottom line of this is, for us, we understand that. But for those who are propagating the distrust, the hate, the mistrust, and the persecution, they need to understand the why. And that is exactly what Martin Luther King tried to bring about to them. So for this Martin Luther King's holiday, unfortunately, we won't be able to do what we usually do, which is try to get involved in the community because of COVID-19. But I will take this time to reflect on how his presence, his efforts, his achievements have benefited me personally in allowing me to integrate a school that had not previously been integrated and to achieve those things that I've been able to achieve, and how it's affected all of us and benefited us nationally and internationally. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to share about Dr. King's influence on me. I grew up in South Carolina during the height of the Civil Rights Movement. I was inspired and influenced by several iconic civil rights activists and pastors. The Reverend Dr. Quincy Newman, Field Secretary of the South Carolina NAACP in my home church, and the Reverend Matthew McCollum while attending college in Orangeburg. Also, Dr. Benjamin Mays, president of Morehouse College, would speak to us each year, and I listened to him at Easter from 1961 to 1964, and the attendance with him was mandatory. And I think he also had some influence on Martin Luther King Jr. when he was there at Morehouse. In college, I participated in what Representative John Lewis called good trouble, peaceful protests through marches and sitting demonstrations. We were defended by attorneys Matthew Perry and Ernest Finney, who would become a federal judge and Chief Justice of the South Carolina Supreme Court, respectively. In 1963, I was a junior in college. I was inspired by Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech at the March on Washington for Jobs and Justice. There are countless other inspired talks about Dr. King, but I'll just use one that impacted on my life. In 1973, I was selected to be among the first to lead an all-volunteer recruiting area for the U.S. Army. My assignment was to South Chicago and required approval of the local community leaders, including Congressman Ralph Metcalf, Reverend Jesse Jackson, and the Honorable Wallace Muhammad from the Muslim group. I was accepted, and I don't know what my qualification of Jesse Jackson and Congressman Metcalf were frat brothers. But I was accepted, and my office was 2 rooms from that of Reverend Abernathy, who at the time was leader of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Over the 3 years that I was there, from 1973 to 76, my group set more than 3,000 disadvantaged and underprivileged of all races and genders on a path of employment, higher education, and economic stability as Dr. King had dreamed. Today, more than 50 years after Dr. King's speech, I remain focused on matters of equality and social justice.
Who was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to me? I was born into a racist environment, and all the expectation was I would follow suit. But I surprised everyone at a young age. My mother would take us by bus downtown, my sister and I. And we'd be sitting in the front of the bus, and black people would be standing in the back, unable to sit in the front. And I was about 5 or 6 years old. I thought, this is outrageous. And that feeling continued to grow within me. But everyone around me seemed to assume that I was a racist also, and it was a lonely period of my life as I developed. The thing I saw most in Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was his dignity. He had the same dignity when he was in a Selma, Alabama jail as he did when he gave his famous I Have a Dream speech in Washington, D.C. His life has impacted mine because I found people who believed as I believe, and I found a place to belong and people with whom I could share those beliefs. And for Martin Luther King Jr. Day, I'm going to help a friend of mine who was recently in a serious auto accident, and I'm going to take down their Christmas tree. Thank you.
So yes, this is Deacon Leonard Chambliss. I grew up in Jackson, Mississippi, and at age 13, a civil rights leader by the name of Medgar Evers was killed. Dr. King came to Jackson to be the keynote speaker at his funeral. And the interesting thing is that because of the turmoil in the South, churches were being burned, people were being killed. There was an incredibly negative group of government people called the Citizens Council. And anytime Black people did anything to advance the cause, many of them would lose their jobs if they worked for government, such as school teachers or whatever. Dr. King's funeral was attended by several hundred people in the Masonic Temple, which was the only gathering building in the city of Jackson owned by African Americans that wasn't a church, and churches were being bombed. And as a 13-year-old, our church youth choir was asked to sing at Medgar Evers' funeral, which Dr. King presided over. And so I was on the stage with Dr. King at the age of 13, and it was a most impressive event for me. It frightened me. But the interesting thing was there were people there that we knew, our neighbors and our friends. And I'll never forget this. There was a reporter from CBS News. I learned his name was Dan Rather, who is now retired. And so Dan, he turned beet red in the face as Dr. King started laying into this unbelievable act of murdering Medgar Evers. And then they walked down the street after the funeral to the funeral home, where then Medgar Evers' body was flown to Washington, D.C., and he was buried in Arlington National Cemetery. So this is my image of being around Dr. King. I did not know then the impact that it would have on my life, but I will never forget that image. Now, the second time that I encountered Dr. King, my life went on, and 5 years later, I end up as a freshman at Morehouse. And in April of '68 of my freshman year, Dr. King was killed. And so again, here I am, pretty much a young kid from Jackson, Mississippi, in the big city of Atlanta. And what do I see? I see 100,000 people march from downtown Ebenezer Baptist Church to the campus of Morehouse College. And it was combined Morehouse and Atlanta University. 100,000 people on our campus lawn, mourning, but celebrating his life. And then again, it's a visual impact that I will never forget. And so how does Dr. King impact my life? I always live by his pronouncement that his dream would be that we would all be measured not by the color of our skin, but by the content of our character. And so for me, that was his impact on my life, and I have never forgotten it.